A column or pillar in architecture and structural engineering is a structural element that transmits, through compression, the weight of the structure above to other structural elements below. In other words, a column is a compression member. The term column applies especially to a large round support with a capital and a base, a pedestal, and made of stone, or appearing to be so. A small wooden or metal support is typically called a post, and supports with a rectangular or other non-round section are usually called piers. For the purpose of wind or earthquake engineering, columns may be designed to resist lateral forces. Other compression members are often termed columns because of the similar stress conditions. Columns are frequently used to support beams or arches on which the upper parts of walls or ceilings rest. In architecture, column refers to such a structural element that also has certain proportional and decorative features. A column might also be a decorative element not needed for structural purposes. Many columns are engaged, that is to say, form part of a wall. History. All significant Iron Age civilizations of the Near East and Mediterranean made some use of columns. In ancient Egyptian architecture as early as 2600 BC, the architect Imhotep made use of stone columns whose surface was carved to reflect the organic form of bundled reeds. In later Egyptian architecture, faceted cylinders were also common. Egyptian columns are famously present in the Great Hypostyle Hall of Karnak, where 134 columns are lined up in 16 rows, with some columns reaching heights of 24 meters. Some of the most elaborate columns in the ancient world were those of the Persians, especially the massive stone columns erected in Persepolis. They included double bull structures in their capitals. The Hall of 100 Columns at Persepolis, measuring 70 times 70 meters, was built by the Achaemenid king Darius I. Many of the ancient Persian columns are standing, some being more than 30 meters tall. The Minoans used whole tree trunks, usually turned upside down in order to prevent regrowth, stood on a base set in the style of base and topped by a simple round capital. These were then painted as in the most famous Minoan palace of Knossos. The Minoans employed columns to create large open-plan spaces, light wells, and as a focal point for religious rituals. These traditions were continued by the later Mycenaean civilization, particularly in the Megrona Hall at the heart of the palaces. The importance of columns and the reference to palaces and therefore authority is evidenced in the use in heraldic motifs such as the famous Lion Gate of Mycenae, where two lions stand each side of a column. Being made of wood, these early columns have not survived, but the stone bases have, and through these we may see the use and arrangement in these palace buildings. The Egyptians, Persians, and other civilizations mostly used columns for the practical purpose of holding up the roof inside a building, preferring outside walls to be decorated with reliefs or painting, but the ancient Greeks, followed by the Romans, loved to use them on the outside as well, and the extensive use of columns on the interior and exterior of buildings is one of the most characteristic features of classical architecture. In buildings like the Parthenon, the Greeks developed the classical orders of architecture, which were most easily distinguished by the form of the column and its various elements. The Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders were expanded by the Romans to include the Tuscan and Composite orders. Columns, or at least large structural exterior ones, became much less significant in the architecture of the Middle Ages. The classical forms were abandoned in both Byzantine architecture and the Romanesque and Gothic architecture of Europe in favor of more flexible forms, with capitals often using various types of foliage decoration, and in the West scenes with figures carved in relief. Renaissance architecture was keen to revive the classical vocabulary and styles, and the informed use and variation of the classical orders remained fundamental to the training of architects throughout Baroque. Rococo and neoclassical architecture. Classical orders. The Roman author Vitruvius, relying on the writings of Greek authors, tells us that the ancient Greeks believed that the Doric order developed from techniques for building in wood. The earlier smooth tree trunk was replaced by a stone cylinder. Doric order. The Doric order is the oldest and simplest of the classical orders. It is composed of a vertical cylinder that is wider at the bottom. It generally has neither a base nor a detailed capital. It is instead often topped with an inverted frustum of a shallow cone or a cylindrical band of carvings. It is often referred to as the masculine order because it is represented in the bottom level of the Colosseum and the Parthenon, and was therefore considered to be able to hold more weight. The height-to-thickness ratio is about 8:1. The shaft of a Doric column is almost always fluted. The Greek Doric, developed in the western Dorian region of Greece, is the heaviest and most massive of the orders. It rises from the stylobate without any base. It is from 4 to 6 times as tall as its diameter. It has 20 broad flutes. The capital consists simply of a banded necking swelling out into a smooth ionis, which carries a flat square abacus. The Doric entablature is also the heaviest, being about 1/4 the height column. The Greek Doric order was not used after c. 100 BC until its rediscovery in the mid-18th century. Tuscan order. The Tuscan order, also known as Roman Doric, is also a simple design, the base and capital both being series of cylindrical discs of alternating diameter. The shaft is almost never fluted. The proportions vary, but are generally similar to Doric columns. Height-to-width ratio is about 7:1. Ionic order. The Ionic column is considerably more complex than the Doric or Tuscan. It usually has a base and the shaft is often fluted. The capital features a volute, an ornament shaped like a scroll, at the 4 corners. The height-to-thickness ratio is around 9:1. Due to the more refined proportions and scroll capitals, the Ionic column is sometimes associated with academic buildings. Ionic-style columns were used on the second level of the Colosseum. Corinthian order. The Corinthian order is named for the Greek city-state of Corinth, to which it was connected in the period. However, according to the architectural historian Vitruvius, the column was created by the sculptor Callimachus, probably an Athenian, who drew acanthus leaves growing around a votive basket. In fact, the oldest known Corinthian capital was found in Bassae, dated at 427 BC. It is sometimes called the feminine order because it is on the top level of the Colosseum and holding up the least weight, and also has the slenderest ratio of thickness to height. Height-to-width ratio is about 10:1. Composite order. The composite order draws its name from the capital being a composite of the Ionic and Corinthian capitals. The acanthus of the Corinthian column already has a scroll-like element, so the distinction is sometimes subtle. Generally, the composite is similar to the Corinthian in proportion and employment, often in the upper tiers of colonnades. Height-to-width ratio is about 11:1 or 12:1. Solomonic. A Solomonic column, sometimes called barley sugar, begins on a base and ends in a capital, which may be of any order, but the shaft twists in a tight spiral, producing a dramatic, serpentine effect of movement. Solomonic columns were developed in the ancient world but remained rare there. A famous marble set, probably 2nd century, was brought to St. Peter's, Rome by Constantine I and placed round the saint's shrine, and was thus familiar throughout the Middle Ages, by which time they were thought to have been removed from the Temple of Jerusalem. The style was used in bronze by Bernini for his spectacular St. Peter's baldachin, actually a ciborium, and thereafter became very popular with Baroque and Rococo church architects, above all in Latin America, where they were very often used, especially only on a small scale, as they are easy to produce in wood by turning on a lathe. Pillar tombs. Pillar tombs are monumental graves, which typically feature a single, prominent pillar or column, are often made of stone. A number of world cultures incorporated pillars into tomb structures. In the ancient Greek colony of Lycia in Anatolia, one of these edifices is located at the tomb of Xanthos. In the town of Hanissa in southern Somalia, ruins of houses with archways and courtyards have also been found, along with other pillar tombs, including a rare octagonal tomb.